What's up, badass Blackdesertmobile fans? In today's video, I'm going to be talking about skill animations, and more specifically, frame rates for all of the Phantasma skills. You see, all skill animations have certain frame rates. Some are longer, some are shorter. Knowing these can be crucial in clutch moments where milliseconds can make a difference. All classes in Blackdesertmobile come with 10 skills, 9 of which are testable. There is no need to test the level 70 heal/enrage skill. Let's take a step back for a moment. What is a skill animation? First and foremost, most games are played in 60 FPS, which stands for 60 frames per second. That means within 1 second, 60 different frames or images are triggered. A skill animation is made up of 3 different types of frames. We have the startup frame, the active frame, and the recovery frame. The startup frame is how long a move takes before it hits an opponent. The less of these, the better. Longer startup frames can cost you, especially if you don't have immunity with it. Active frames are directly after your startup frames. This is where your skill connects with the target. Some of these skills have active frames, such as the Lancer's Divine Judgment, which leaves a sacred ground area of effect which persists past the character's recovery frame, making it a special active frame. Generally speaking, you want more active frames because that means you have more frames to connect with the target. Recovery frames are the frames directly after the active frames. These frames are where you cannot use another ability, thus the recovery phase. This is where you are typically the most vulnerable. Also, you will notice as I go through the skill, during the recovery phase, you will see me spamming the next skill so I could test the recovery frames accurately. Okay, so now I'm going to go through all 9 of the Phantasma skills, the startup, active, and recovery phases for each. I'm going to give you an almost exact number of frames for each phase. And why you say almost? Well, I am human and this wasn't an easy task. If you enjoy this type of video and want to see more of it, I need to know. I do not read minds. I made this video because one of you DM'd me and mentioned this as an idea. So shout out to Pancata, and with that being said, let's dive right in. The first skill we have is Phase Blade, and this is probably the least used skill for the Phantasma, so it's going to be great to give you guys an idea how I set this up. First, I'm going to show you the full skill in slow motion. Then I'm going to show you the full skill in normal motion, normal mode. And then I'm going to show you the startup phase slowed down so you can see I can't show you every frame, unfortunately, but I slowed it down to as slow as I could make it to show you as many frames as I could. Then we're going to talk about how many frames is in each. Then we're going to do the active and then the recovery phase and show you how many is in each. So there was the startup phase for this one. And the startup phase for Phase Blade had 24 frames, which is a little bit on the higher side. And then we're going to show you the startup frames again to give you an idea of what I was talking about. And then we're going to go right into active frames right here. So this is where we're actively hitting the opponent. It does have active frames of 25. So there's 25 frames where could potentially connect with the target. After the active frames where you have the recovery frames, and this is where you can't use an ability. So in order to test this, I had to make sure I had abilities equipped, and other abilities equipped aside from the skill that I was using, and I was ready to pound the next skill, and I tested how long it took to activate the next skill after the skill that I used, and the recovery phase frame rates for this skill was 6. So it didn't have a very long recovery phase. None of the skills really had a very long frame rate recovery phase from what I've seen. The next skill is Umbral Pillars. This is a more popular skill. For the full slow-mo here, you can see it hits the target. It does have a wide radius on the skill, which is very nice. And then we'll show you the normal mode here. So it does have a wide radius for active frame rate, and it does persist until the end of the recovery rate. So it's a special active frame rate. As you can see there, that phase still recovered until she was almost done with her recovery phase. So the startup phase frames is right here, and it's a total of 22 frames in the startup. I do have all of this calculated, and I do have it sitting at the end. All of the numbers, the startup, active, and recovery frame rates for each. Here's the startup frames again for this. And then we're going to go into the active frames right here. So this is where we're doing damage and connecting with the target. There's a big explosion, that big AoE. And that takes a total of 26 active frames for the entire active frame process. So the connect where she's doing damage and connecting to the target. And then after the active frame again comes the recovery frames. Took a long time to edit all this, believe me. So there's the recovery frames, which takes a total of 8, which is on the higher side for recovery frames. And we'll show you the recovery frames one more time here so you can see them. It's a little quick snap of her finger. The recovery frames is super quick. All right, up next is Vediant Shockwave. Shorter startup. So for the full slow-mo, as you can see right here, this is a very, very useful skill. You use it pretty much all the time, especially for PvP. It knocks the target down. So here's this full skill in normal mode. And then the startup frame rates are right here. And the total startup frame rates is only 18, so it's not too bad. It's one of the lower side on frame rates. So it has a quick startup frame rate time. And then the startup frames here again for you guys. All right, so we got active frames here now. And that's all of the active frames, which is a total of 30, which is on the, it's about average, but that's only because some of the active frames for some of these skills is really long. So it is a little bit on the higher side as far as active frames. The amount of frames it can take or do damage. And then after the active frames comes the recovery frames again. And the recovery frames for this is 7. None of the skills had recovery frames. I think the highest was 11. So 7 for this one. And then you can see the recovery frames here again. I know it's pretty funny with her falling like that. We have Dark Cleave next. Dark Cleave. You can see the skill slow motion here. Now she does have a longer startup time frame or frame rate. You saw that there where she like bends down right there and it comes back up like she's going to uppercut, but she does do that skill ability. In the normal mode, you can see right here, it's a lot quicker. She doesn't do that stutter step in the normal mode. You have to really slow it down to see that little stutter step that she was doing. So this does have a little bit longer of a startup frame. Like I said, coming in at 26 total for the startup frame rates, which is a little bit on the higher side. Dark Cleave does have a range to it, so you could get away with, it is in most setups and you do use it because of the range. So there's the startup frames again. As far as active frames, you can see them right here. That sword, when you slow it down, does look pretty badass. So it is 31 total active frames, which is on the slightly higher side as well, which is good. And we can see those active frames here again in slow motion. Right after the active frames comes the recovery frames again. Minimal amount of frames in the recovery phase. For this one, it's only 6, so a short recovery time on Dark Cleave. Again, like I said at the beginning, knowing these frame rates is important for combos and knowing when to use an ability against an opponent as well. Up next is Pneumatic Burst. Pneumatic Burst has a fast startup, active, and recovery frame rates. You can see the full slow-mo here. This is a nice ability because you get 2 charges of it, and it's fast for all aspects. That's normal speed right there. And then here's the startup frame rates. She likes to bend down and then like throw her hand at him. It is 17 total frames for the startup, which is not very many, which is very nice for that skill. Remember, the less of those, the better. So here we can see it again. After that, we have the active frames right here. This is where we're doing the damage and connecting with the target. Pneumatic Burst is a very nice skill, coming in with 22 active frames for the active frames. And again, the longer the active frames are, the better. But again, if you have less of active frames, it means you can use that ability more often as well. And it does come with 2 charges, like I said. For recovery frames, minimal yet again. Total of 5, so it is one of the lowest and it is lower than the average of 6.5. So it does recover super fast startup, and a really fast active frame rates for Pneumatic Burst. Next, we have Twin Slash, a unique skill nonetheless. Most dashes are unique in this game. Dashes that stun and daze targets, etc. So this is the full skill normal. You just saw the full skill in slow-mo. And then for the startup frames right here, she goes invisible right before she hits the target. And the amount of frames that this takes is 13. That is the lowest of all the skills, so it is a very quick skill. Now, this could take a little bit longer because you could stand back a little bit further, and that could increase the amount of frame rates that it took. So obviously there's variables. I just kept it at the simple standard one for this one. For active frames, you can see them right there. It's coming in with a total of 17 active frames, which is, again, it's the second lowest actually for active frame rates. And that's just because it's supposed to be a stun. This isn't a heavy hitting ability. It's not, you don't want a lot of active frames on that ability. That's why it's good to combo up with Pneumatic Burst, because that one also has a minimum amount of active frames. Twin Slash for recovery frame rates, it's only 3. So that's, I mean, it's your dash. You get in there, it's quick. It has a quick recovery time, so you can use another skill right away after it. And overall, it's very good as far as frame rates go. Next skill we have is Supernova, which is the complete opposite. Full skill slow-mo is right here. And again, 60 frames are in 1 second. This skill takes almost a second and a half for full cast. So full skill normal speed right here. The startup frames is right here. It is a very beautiful looking skill. She like summons it forever. What seems like forever though. The amount of frames that are in the startup is staggering, so you want to make sure you pay attention when using this skill. 72 frame rates in the startup. That's astonishing. So yeah, you want to make sure you use that skill very wisely, or else you could get caught and screwed. As far as the active frame rates, again, it is on the higher side because of that big explosion. It's not the highest though, as we can see coming up right here. Active frames, the explosion. It is a nice AoE as well, so it does have a nice radius to it. And for active frames, it's coming with a total of 35. So 35 frames for the entire attack. It's not too bad. Longer the better again. And we can see it here right again, that big purple beautiful explosion. And then for recovery frames, it is on the higher side. As far as recovery goes, it is sitting at 9 frames. So I mean, it's still not over 10 or 11, or, you know, it's still not a very high amount, but the less of those, the better. And we can see him here again. Next skill we have, the second to last, is Phantom Dash, another unique skill. Full slow-mo here. It does hit targets along the way, so it's a long dash that creates a long startup frame rate. So it has a longer startup frame rate, especially if you use the dash further back. If you use it right away on top of the target, it's not as effective. So for this test, I wanted to use it as far back as possible and still hit the target. So startup frames, you can see right here, creates like a little void tunnel in front of her, purple void tunnel. It's pretty cool. It has 47 frames in the startup, so it is the second longest startup. You are immune during that dash, so it is very nice startup in that aspect. As far as active frame rates, now again, this isn't one of your damaging skills. It isn't a heavy hitter. It has a very, very short active frame rate. So it has the second longest startup time, but has the shortest active frame rate of any skill, sitting at 10. Twin Slash was 17 to give you a comparison. This one's almost half active frame rate. So it's very, very quick. And you can see it again right here. Try to slow it down and give you a couple clips in there. Recovery frames, again, very quick. It's tied for the fastest with Twin Slash or Twin Dash Slash at 3 total active frame rates for the recovery frame rates. And you can see them again right here. And then the last skill we have is Nova Chain. Yet another unique skill when we're talking about skill animations and frame rates and all this fun jazz. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you're still watching, I appreciate it. Make sure you hit that like as well as leave a comment down below. That's the full skill in slow-mo. Here's the full skill normal. And then we have the startup frame rates. And it does have a little bit longer on the startup frame rates, sitting at 28. It's not the worst. It's not the best. It's not too bad as far as a startup, though. Does not come with immunity. This skill does not come with an immunity, so it's not too favorable in PvP. We can see the startup frame here again. Now, the active frames is the unique aspect here because it does like a double explosion. It's sitting at, this skill has the longest active frame rate. And remember, like I said 4 times now, active frame rates, the longer the better. That means the more chance to connect with the target. It's sitting at 74 active frame rates. That's almost double. That's almost a second and a half this skill's sitting in active frame rate status till total. That's just crazy. It's still not a popular skill, I know. As far as recovery frame rates, it is sitting at 11, so this is, as far as recovery goes, it does take the longest to recover of any skill as well. So it has the longest active frame rate, the longest recovery frame rates. It's not too terrible with startup frame rates. Alright, so that is all 9 skills for the Phantasma class. Let's take a look at them all in general with my sheet here. I do have them all written down. So, Phase Blade, you can see Umbral Pillars, Vediant Shockwave, Dark Cleave, Pneumatic Burst, Twin Slash, Supernova, Phantom Dash, Nova Chain. You can see the averages at the bottom down there. The average frame rate is 29.67. The active frame rate average was 30. And the recovery frame rate average was 6.44. And you can see the high was Supernova for startup, Nova Chain for active, and then Nova Chain again for recovery. So it's some pretty interesting stuff. I appreciate Pancata for coming to me and suggesting this. I'm curious to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below if you are appreciative of this video. It was super insightful and it'll help you out with your Phantasma class. If you want to see it for other class, again, let me know. I appreciate you guys stopping by. And with that being said, I will see you next time.